Hello and welcome to another video where we're going to be looking at a band called Boney M. So there's a lot of mystery behind this band Boney M, and you can't do this topic, as I've discovered, without discovering a certain character who pulled a lot of the strings and really made the group what it was. So a lot of this I did not know myself, so this is all very new to me, and I'm kind of discovering it along with you. Chapter 1, The Man Behind the Hits. Frank Farian. A name you might not recognise, but a person whose music you have definitely heard. So let's go into a little bit of this guy's life before we get into the sort of main topic. Born Franz Reuther, if my German pronunciation is anything to go by, but he was born in Germany in 1941. He grew up without his father, who was killed, sadly, in World War II, before Franz was born. He originally trained as a cook, but like many young men, he went on to discover rock and roll and then changed his name to Frank Farian. This is where he would leave being a cook behind and embark on a very interesting and eventful music career. Let's put some numbers on that and look at some of his achievements. Over his lifetime, Farian sold 850 million records and earned 800 gold and platinum awards. A truly legendary achievement, but he did have struggles to find his sound in his early career. His first band, Frankie Boys Schatten, released a single in 1964 called Shouting Ghost. Unfortunately, it flopped. Then in 1967, under the name Frankie Farian, he recorded a cover of Otis Redding's Mr. Pitiful. I haven't listened to that yet, so I'll have to go back and see what that was like. He eventually signed a record deal and appeared on Hit Parade, a German TV show. By the mid-1970s, Farian found success with German-language covers of other international hits. I haven't listened to any of those covers, I must confess, but this guy was kind of new to me, to be honest. So under his own name, Frankie Farian, he's had some mild success. So he's now on the cusp of achieving some serious success, hitting a gold mine and global fame. But his part he actually plays in that, you'll have to wait and see if you don't know already. So before we get to Boney M, I'm just going to skip forward and leave out some of those key parts. But in the late 80s, Farian used the same formula for these projects and, of course, produced the group Milli Vanilli. But that's a whole different video. He's a controversial genius, a master of creating chart-topping hits, but also someone who has blurred the lines of authenticity and maybe even exploited people kind of along the way as well. His influence undoubtedly shaped disco, pop, and the Eurodance scene. So chapter 2, Boney M. German producer Frank Farian, who we've just learnt a little bit about, has recorded the song Baby Do You Wanna Bump under the name Boney M. This song was actually inspired by Prince Buster's 1960s track Al Capone, which as soon as I put this song on, I realised something very interesting in the fact that this is basically Gangsters by The Specials. So Frank Farian's Baby Do You Wanna Bump was inspired by Al Capone, the song by Prince Buster, who then also inspired The Specials and the song Gangsters. So you might recognise this. So I didn't research too much into Prince Buster's version, Al Capone, but I was very interested about Gangsters by The Specials. It's supposedly about some kind of event in which the band were on tour in France with The Clash, and they were kind of in trouble for some damage to a hotel. A classic like rock and roll incident where they just start damaging a hotel. But it's actually rumoured to be another English band, The Damned, who had terrorised the hotel manager and had done some kind of damage. The hotel manager apparently held their guitars as collateral, which is not cool, man. But if you're going to destroy someone's hotel, maybe tit for tat. So this event of damaging this hotel seemed to have escalated to a point in which the Specials kind of get done, and they're the ones that pay for all the damage. So if you're not familiar with The Damned, you might know their song New Rose, and you might recognise this riff. So, bit of a classic punk riff there by The Damned, and they seem to be embroiled in this particular incident with the Specials and all this kind of thing. But yeah, what a great tune. That is also kind of like Ash's Burn Baby Burn. So much to discover in the music here, which is pretty sweet. Give those songs a listen. So back to this sort of side track that we're taking, Gangsters by The Special. So the opening line is also sort of shared. Prince Buster's version is Al Capone's Guns Don't Argue. But this was changed for the Specials to Bernie Rhodes Knows Don't Argue, as an insult aimed at Bernard Rhodes, who had briefly been the band's manager. I thought they were just directly linked, but they've actually changed like the opening line there. So it's very similar, and it's got all the similar sort of musical parts as well. But despite being a top 10 hit, the song did not appear on any UK version of any studio album by the Specials, although it was included on some overseas releases, apparently. Thanks Wikipedia. So yeah, a bit of a sidetrack there, but basically Frank Farian was also inspired by Prince Buster's Al Capone track. Back onto the main timeline here, back to Farian and Boney M, and Farian is going to get up to some of his old tricks. Farian provided both the deep male vocals and the high falsetto backing on this song, credited under the pseudonym Zambi, but Prince Buster was not actually credited at all to Baby Do You Wanna Bump. So it's kind of already maybe a bit shifty there. The single had a small success in Belgium and the Netherlands, but it flopped in the UK. This is kind of the birth of Boney M now, a bit of a TV miracle you might want to say, because without certain appearance on this German TV show, they were kind of not really anything at this point. And even songs like Daddy Cool. Songs like that weren't even really big at that point. Chapter 3, the birth of Boney M, and enter the musicians that we see on stage and that we might be more familiar with. Enter Robert Bobby Farrell, who was a dancer from Aruba, and the three singers that we usually see on stage, Marcia Barrett, Elizabeth Mitchell, and Maisie Williams. So these are the guys on stage that we might be more familiar with, and less so Frank Farian. They had a big breakthrough performance on this German TV show, Music Laden. So they appeared in these pretty flashy and eccentric costumes and were essentially miming to songs like Daddy Cool, which, as I said, weren't even big hits back then. As with many groups that seem to make it, the reaction was immediate. Daddy Cool hitting #1 in Germany, Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, Spain, France, and Austria, so quite a bit of Europe. The debut album, Take the Heat Off Me, followed suit, also reaching #1, and another fantastic single, Sunny, also became a massive #1 hit and reached the UK top 10, and what a tune it is. Yeah, so absolutely love that song. Such a great, disco kind of pop song. Yeah, and it reached the UK top 10, which is kind of awesome. Moving on to 1978 and perhaps the peak of their success. I got songs like Rivers of Babylon, Brown Girl in the Ring, which actually I'd never heard before and still haven't heard, so I need to check that one out. Their third album, kind of funkily named Night Flight to Venus, featured one of their most famous songs, Rasputin, another chart-topping smash hit, which is another absolute banger. Okay, let's see if I can do this in sort of one whole go, but this is sort of take 50 at this point. Here we go with the intro. Bassline. That's supposed to be bassline. Can't talk. Main melody. Strings. That last bit. I love the strings that go bring. Well, it's the best I could do, but what a fun. There's loads of parts to that you can sort of learn on guitar, and it's rather fun. Where were we? Rasputin, another chart-topping smash, and it's just such a great song. A legacy of disco greatness, basically. What started as a studio experiment by Frank Farian turned into one of the biggest disco acts of all times. They just got catchy songs, flashy performances. Even today, hits like Rasputin and Sunny, of course, remain instantly recognizable. And I don't know, people playing Rasputin on guitars and things like that. And it's just great music that lives on in that sort of disco pop era. But we're looking at this going back in time. And of course, we're going to go to chapter 4. And this is sort of the death of disco era, unfortunately, which again, I wasn't too aware of. So this is all new topics for me and new information mixed with all the music, which is lovely. What a great thing to put out there. So, the death of disco. A time when disco once was the biggest genre in the world, faced massive backlash. Whilst disco remained popular in Europe up until apparently around 1984, at that time, in the US, it faced an almost organised effort to erase it for some strange reason. Not sure Europe necessarily agreed with this. The US seemed to sort of just go off and do their own thing sometimes. One event in particular came to symbolise this movement, and it was Disco Demolition Night. So this was decline of disco, but why did it happen? By 1979 and 1980, disco's popularity started to fade and be under sort of backlash in the US. Critics said the disco scene had become elitist and excessive, more about the fashion and lifestyle than the music. I mean, we have heard disco be described as sort of a bit robotic and maybe a bit formulaic, which may be a fair point, but we'll see. Many radio stations started switching back to rock music. I guess late 60s, 70s rock kind of went into the disco movement and now back again. But the real turning point came in July 1979 at Comiskey Park in Chicago. A baseball promotion turned into a full-blown riot. Steve Dahl, a Chicago DJ, hated disco, had a hate for it for whatever reason, convinced the White Sox to hold a disco demolition night at the stadium. Interesting. Fans could bring a disco record, get in for just 98 cents. What was the plan? To blow up a crate of disco records on the field between games of a double header. So I'm guessing there was 2 games. But so you bring the record that you own. So you must have liked disco at some point if you owned that record. And then you get to blow it up. Instead of the expected 20,000 people, over 50,000 people showed up, with thousands sneaking into Comiskey Park. Fans threw records like frisbees. When the explosion happened, thousands stormed the field. The chaos was so bad that the White Sox had to forfeit the game to the Detroit Tigers. Disco Demolition Night sped up disco's downfall, pushing it out of the mainstream. Some might just see this as some kind of hilarious moment in history, but rightfully some might also argue there's not very nice undertones going on here, and people targeting disco for all sorts of reasons. Regardless of the intent, after that night, record labels backed away from disco, and radio stations dropped it fast. Dropped it like a lead balloon. But disco didn't completely die. It evolved into dance music, house music, and pop, and obviously influences artists today to no end. I think you could argue even disco has had some kind of a comeback. You can hear it in all sorts of music now, and we love Boney M to this day. So to conclude that other sort of sidetrack there, the Disco Demolition Night was something I'd never heard of, but we learnt that disco sort of disappeared from the charts around that time, back onto the main timeline. So calling this the final chapter, the beginning of the end of Boney M. The first sign of trouble, you might ask? A delayed album in 1981 really hurt their momentum, because by delaying that album, they sort of brought it out around the era in which there was this Disco Demolition Night. Then came the rumours of tension between Bobby Farrell, the frontman that we see dancing every night with Boney M, and Frank Farian, this mysterious character in the background. The big revelation to come out of this was, and the question, who is really singing on all these records and who's singing live? It did become public knowledge that not only did Bobby Farrell not sing, which some suspected, but neither did Maisie Williams. So it wasn't just the fact that people did suspect Bobby Farrell never sang because he's dancing like a lunatic, but then, maybe not close enough to the microphone. I'm guessing some people picked up on it. I'm not sure if Frank Farian ever really publicly came out at that time and sort of declared himself as the voice of all those like deep parts. This plus the changing music trends made Boney M seem outdated after just 5 years in the spotlight, even in Germany where they had a strong fan base, but I think they held true in some areas, perhaps like the Netherlands. They had lineup changes, of course, and struggled to stay relevant. By 1985, Farian had lost interest. He'd rushed albums and they all flopped, and he probably at this point didn't really see them as much of an asset when it comes to recording behind the scenes and putting this music out. So I think he might have had his eye on another group that would come 5 years later, hint, hint, towards a totally different thing, but could be a whole video in itself. Those of you might know what I'm talking about. But the band officially disbanded after their 10-year anniversary gig, I assume. There was some kind of messy aftermath, I think. Some of the members kind of go off and start their own versions of that band, but under the name like Boney M with Bobby Farrell or something like that. But as you can imagine, Farian, being sort of an intelligent guy and business savvy, was having none of it. Liz Mitchell claimed her group was the only true version and was backed by Farian. So there was kind of an official version out there. When was the last time they were all seen together? It was unfortunately at Bobby Farrell's funeral, a sort of bittersweet end to a group that once ruled the charts. Bobby Farrell passed away on December 30th, 2010 in St. Petersburg in Russia. The exact same date and city where Rasputin died. So massive coincidence and fairly eerie because of Bobby Farrell's portrayal as Rasputin on stage with Boney M for all those times they played that song. Pretty weird. As for the chap Frank Farian, who has been behind all of this and pulling the strings, he actually went on to form Milli Vanilli, who I'm sure you might be familiar with and who I have hinted at throughout this whole video, but that is a story definitely for another time. Lip syncing definitely being the big sort of elephant in the room for this whole thing. Milli Vanilli went on to be quite controversial, whereas Boney M sort of seemed to slip by and he kind of got away with it for that one, and a lot of their songs, are sort of loved today. Even decades later, the Boney M legacy does live on. Thank you for listening to that kind of wild tale of a very interesting and very cool band with a few little detours along the way. If you like this, please subscribe and give us a like. Let us know what other topics you might want me to look at in this kind of same format, and I'll catch you at the next one. Sort of 5 year, God, I just keep burping because of this iron brew.